Hey everybody, welcome to my talk. My name is PJ. The original title of this talk is Urban Legends, What Your Code Makes You Who You Are. I had an alternate talk because a lot of the research that I did for this talk kind of indicated that everything is dead, so why do we even bother? I thought that was really kind of dark, so I went for the more fun talk. So a little bit about me. I work at Blue Box. They're infrastructure focused, owned by IBM, do a lot of cool stuff, powered by OpenStack. Kind of awesome. If you want to talk to me about that, totally happy to talk about that after the talk. It's not really what the talk is about, but they do kind of pay me to do these things. I do a lot of things. I'm a developer. I've been a developer for several years. Beyond that, I'm a hockey coach. I go to lots of conferences and speak. I'm a musician. I've been playing drums since I was 6 years old. I also, at one point in time, did let my 11-year-old daughter keynote RubyConf. She's kind of a big deal. Kind of a bigger deal than me. I also love karaoke. I was the founder of Ruby Karaoke, and I helped Jeremy Nicola and Davey Shafik to kind of bring that into the PHP community with PHP karaoke. We are hoping to do some karaoke here in Salt Lake City at some point in time, probably tomorrow night. Beyond that, I also help to coordinate an organization called Prompt. We're mhprompt.org on the internet, and the idea behind it is to get a conversation started about mental health issues in tech. These are things that, as developers, we tend not to talk about, and we really should be, because the only way we're going to help our community get more healthy and more mentally stable is by talking about these things and working through our problems. And if you want to know more about that, Ed Finkler's right over there. He knows more about it than I do. I just coordinate. But the talk, what is the talk about? That's why you're here, is for the talk. So, we're all part of different communities, and we know different languages, we know different things. And what I want to talk about is kind of starting off with misconceptions, things that we put labels on that aren't necessarily true, things that maybe you've heard about in the community, or you've heard people say, you've seen tweets about it, what have you. But I also want to talk about the community in general and how we interact, and the way that we can make that a better thing. And also kind of the misconceptions about the difference between enterprise and open source, which I think are kind of important. Even though the talk is called Urban Legends, what I'm not going to talk about is actual urban legends. So if you were coming thinking that we were going to talk about chupacabras and Sasquatch, I'm sorry you're disappointed. And you're going to I get that a lot. But yeah, these are the urban legends that apply to us, people in tech. So let's get started. I'm a Rubyist. I know that's weird because it's a PHP conference, but that's kind of the whole point of all this. Ruby kind of gets badly labeled a lot. People are like, oh, it's hipster, people make stupid apps with Ruby, and it's ridiculous. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is Rails. If you're not familiar, how many of you guys have done Ruby before? How many of you are familiar with the Ruby and Rails community? How many of you have at least heard the name DHH? Yeah, if you know anything about Rails, Rails has this attitude of it wanted to make getting Ruby on the web easier. Great, perfect. This is the kind of thing that we need, because Ruby was an object-oriented language that lived on machines. And there was no real easy framework to get it up, so someone invented Rails. This guy, David Heinemeier Hansen, he was like 20 years old when he did it. And because of that, he's kind of got a mouth on him. But the real problem came when people started to apply Rails in building actual applications for business. Because the idea was Rails is magic. Everything is automagical. It generates all these things for you. It does 90% of the work, so you can only focus on that last 10%. And so a lot of business analysts, a lot of other developers were like, well, see, they're not really doing work over there. They're not doing crap. So the first myth I kind of want to bust is the fact that Ruby is not Rails. Ruby is a lot of things. It's not just for the web. There's lots of tools you can build in Ruby. There's lots of things that you can do with it. So the idea that it's just this thing that you automatically build a quick web application, you build a blog in 15 minutes, yay! It's actually, there's a lot more to it than that. Another myth about Ruby is it's not useful. I'm going to let this sink in for a second. I saw this cartoon a little while ago and I thought it was kind of hilarious. So on the side you have a guy in a hat wearing a Ruby t-shirt talking about how he builds apps that can find every single source espresso shop south of Market in San Francisco. The guy next to him, who's obviously an enterprise developer, probably does Java and is like, impressive, I built the app that is keeping his plate in the air. Okay, it's a joke, but you kind of take it to heart. The first thing is not every Rubyist, contrary to looking at me, has a beard, wears a hat, or wears Ruby proudly on a t-shirt. I know I'm not the best example to say that's not true, but it's not true. The other thing is, people actually build lots of useful stuff in Ruby. Bluebox was built on Ruby and Rails. Groupon uses it. Hulu, Living Social, Urban Dictionary probably had a good example of something good that's come out of Ruby, but it's there. Zendesk, like a lot of these tools that people use every day, especially in startups, were built on Ruby on Rails. Twitter was based on Ruby on Rails, and it still has a lot of Ruby in the back end. So obviously there's some use in that. So let's talk about the arch nemesis of Ruby, the big enemy, the elephant in the room, if you will, PHP. So for a while, and I did PHP for a long time. I did Visual Foxpro for a long time, but that's not something to problem. When Ruby started to develop, there was this big animosity thing that suddenly happened. Like PHP, ruler of the internet, ultimate web application building structure. What do we need this Ruby and Rails shit for? Sorry, I swear to forewarn, I'll try to do my best not to. We do have problems. So let's get rid of this idea first of all. Rubyists, in general, don't have a problem with PHP. Folks who do PHP, in general, do not have a problem with Ruby. But there's this perpetual myth that there's these two, there's so much friction between these two communities because they're both kind of working in the same space, and why are they always building against each other? Why did PHP have to come up with frameworks, all of which were actually MVC frameworks, but they're all based on Rails? It's like, no, they're based on MVC. MVC is the same thing regardless of what flavor of anything you're doing with it. Elixir has Phoenix, that's MVC. Go is working on an MVC framework. These are all MVC frameworks that was a concept from the 70s. It has nothing to do with Rails. Rails was by far not the first to use it. So be it. So the first thing you get from a lot of, especially new developers with all the boot camps and junior dev camps that are around is that, PHP is dead. PHP is over. It's so 1987. Why would you use PHP? It's for personal homepages, right? I may have just given you an answer to one of the sponsors' trivia questions that help you win a curved monitor, so if you want to write that down. But I always thought this was funny because I used to work in an organization with one of the other speakers, and we talked about the fact that PHP is literally everywhere. 70%, and that's a round up, round down, plus or minus, 70% of the servers, virtual and real, have PHP running on them. Even if you dig into the internal of Rails, there is a PHP format in Rails. There are PHP gems for Rails and Ruby. So PHP is obviously not dead. It's building great things. It's doing wonderful things. What else did they say about PHP? Where are my objects? This usually comes from older developers who've been around for a while. And they are thinking of PHP 2, 3, 4. Anything before 5, where the object orientation concept wasn't quite there. It was kind of like an object reflective thing where they weren't true objects. But PHP now, with 5 and 7, has actual literal objects that you can use. It's just as much an object-oriented language as any other object-oriented language out there. What else about PHP? It's slow. PHP is an interpreted language. And just like Ruby, it doesn't have a built-in compiler. So that's true of a lot of languages. And when we talk about slow, this is something that drives me nuts about any language that someone says, this is slow. Slow, what do we think of as slow? It takes 100 milliseconds instead of 50 milliseconds? Can you count a millisecond? It takes you more than a millisecond to realize I just said something. Slow is a concept that I think we put a little too much emphasis on. Therefore, I think saying any language is slow, PHP or any other language, all crap. Kind of the same thing with security. PHP is insecure. All those PHP sites are always getting hacked, and they're always seeing news about PHP sites getting hacked. Well, when you're on 70% of the servers, you're going to see a little more news than anybody else. Kind of like when you had Windows XP, yes, Windows XP had more viruses than Mac OS X. Why? Because more people had Windows XP. It just made sense. When it comes to security, this is my thought. Any application you build, and any language that you build, that you make public, is only as secure as you make it. It's a matter of forethought, not a matter of language. So saying PHP is insecure means you're saying a particular PHP application wasn't developed with security in mind, which is true of anything that wasn't developed with security in mind, whether that be software, hardware, doors, whatever. Look at the handles that are in the men's room if you have it. Those were not designed with the user in mind. They don't work. They're really weird. They bang against the counter when you try to turn them off. Things work the way you build them. If you build things with security in mind, it's obviously going to be more secure. So what else do we have? Java. Java is another thought dead language. This is why I almost call this talk everything dead. Why do we bother? But Java, still powers the biggest apps available today. Yes, they may be humongous, horrid monoliths built in code that maybe not many people want to deal with. But if you remember that guy from the cartoon earlier, he was talking about writing in Java. Like a lot of plain software is written in Java. A lot of the things that we see are bank machines are written in Java. Like Java's everywhere. It's not going anywhere. It's definitely not dead. So let's get rid of that. Python. Python. Built for academics. Built for science and mathematics. Can't possibly do anything but academic type work with Python. It's a theoretical language. Why would you build a web application with that or anything like that? Kind of ridiculous. I used to work at a company called Engineering, and we were very big into the community and giving back to the community. And so when it came time for us to decide how we were going to give back to the community, we built an app in Python because it was simple and straightforward. And what the app did was you would go in an YAML file, you'd put a name and a dollar amount. And that would then go out to what was then called Git tip and pay these people out X number of dollars, whatever you allocated per week, so that they would get their Git tip allowances. They would be able to continue to really cool open source projects. And none of this has anything to do with academics or science. It's just like love for community. So yes, you can build really cool APIs and interfaces in Python that have nothing to do with SciPy or PyDeck or anything like that. It's not just an academic language anymore. Linux, not a language. But people have the perception that Linux is strictly for neckbeards, basement dwellers, and people who never plan on moving out of their parents' house. How many busted bank machines or playing movies have you seen where this little penguin pops up? I mean, I travel a lot, so I have seen we've broken the entertainment system, we need to reboot the entire thing many times, and there's Tux letting me know, don't worry, I can watch Avengers Age of Ultron for the 65th time this month, as soon as that guy comes off the screen. So it's really cool, and it's open source. And we all want things to be really cool. We want the right tool for the job. Our job is to get things done. If you think about it in the greater sense, our job is to solve puzzles. Those puzzles aren't cool, they're not going to make a map of the American flag or whatever. They're going to solve problems that someone thinks are problems. Most of what we do is not actually, life-saving or going to change people in any significant way, but we want to make really cool stuff. So if you have a chance to do it in Linux, sure, build your Bitcoin miner in Linux. Build your business platform in Linux. Most of your stacks, most of your server stacks are all done in Linux. So it's not dead, and it's not for people who dwell in basements, not just for building packages while your mom's out getting cat food. It's actually cool, and it's good for people everywhere. Perl. So I wrote a blog article a little while ago. It's actually over a year ago now. I had traveled a lot, done a bunch of conferences, and every conference was like, Ruby's dead, TDD's dead, Rails is dead. And what they actually meant was it's mature, it's not the cool new thing anymore. And it's stable, so it's not like the hotness. And this was the reaction from the Perl community. Is Perl dead? And I was like, what? Someone from Perl paid attention to me, yay. But they kind of got that attitude because it was a long time between Perl releases, wasn't it? We all got a Christmas gift this year. Perl 7 is now available. And it's actually kind of cool. What they did, instead of making a release every year that had some incremental changes and wasn't a big deal, is they took their time over 10 or 12 years to get it right. So yeah, it might have looked dead, but it was really just sleeping, and now it's awake. Swift. Swift is going to fix everything. I think we're done here. I'm just going to walk out. Swift. This is a little bit dated, but Swift was supposed to be the new coolness. When it came out, like every developer I knew, regardless of what language or community they came from, was like, holy shit, Swift is going to change the world. And then originally it was closed source. And originally it didn't do objects. And originally you couldn't get it to work at all. And then somebody tweets this, and this I thought was hilarious. Objective-C developers are now obsolete, please treat them with respect. And I was like, what? I was like, let's just put the Objective-C side aside because Swift is really hard to get into and I have to pay money for it, so screw that. But apparently, does that also mean that old people and pregnant women are obsolete? Because I don't know about you guys, I have kids. I know that pregnant women are not obsolete. Kind of important for the perpetuation of the species. Old people have a lot of knowledge, they need to share. None of these things are obsolete. This is the most ridiculous thing ever. retweeted over 1,000 times. Now, they did try to make a comeback with Swift 2.0. It's now open source. They gave some thought to it. But what I'm really trying to focus on here is it's not always about the new hotness. Just because someone said Go in a talk 2 years ago doesn't mean we all have to drop what we're doing and switch to Go. It's fun to play with new languages, but sometimes maturity, which you're seeing with things like Ruby and PHP and Perl, sometimes maturity brings a better stability and makes it easier to work with so you can build better applications. Anything with the JS. This is a pet peeve of mine. Node.js is really cool, and React.js is pretty cool, and Angular is available. But for a while, everybody would just slap a JS on a word and be like, look, we have a new JavaScript type, application platforming thing. Like, what does Doge.js do? Anybody know? It makes it so that things in your browser will say wow and such good and like that kind of stuff. It doesn't even make sense. Nectar.js doesn't do anything. Kraken.js, built by the team at PayPal. All it does is track payments, which they were already doing through their PHP interface, so they didn't really actually need JS on it. It's absolutely pointless. It's not about what's new and what's hot. It's about evolution. It's about taking something and making it better. And I'll give you an example. So I work at Blue Box. Blue Box is now an IBM company, but when they started, they were a Ruby on Rails hosting company, similar to a few other companies that I may have been part of. But they eventually moved on. They realized, Ruby on Rails isn't where it's at. We need to open it up to other languages. Well, that's cool. Well, maybe we should do it on our own hardware. Oh, that's a good idea. People are really getting into this Docker and OpenStack stuff. Great, that's where we are today. Blue Box went from being a platform as a service that was similar to many other platforms as a service to seeing the needs of the community and saying we really need to get into OpenStack. OpenStack is kind of hard to do. Large organizations don't want to do OpenStack. They don't want to hire 10 guys who run OpenStack. They want to hire Blue Box to run OpenStack for them on their own private or public clouds, depending on how they want to do it. But that's the point. These things change. Things change and progress with time. If they don't progress, they're stagnant and you don't want to use them. So you have to find a balance. So let's talk a little bit about communities. Communities are kind of the same way. In a way, like all the people that are here when we're sitting in the room having lunch or having, we call ourselves a Ski PHP community, or Ski PHP 2016 community if you prefer. Like there's a lot of cool things about community. And I love this diagram because it really kind of outlines how communities in tech work. Like, the red folks there at the bottom can be the Ruby community. And the blue folks there can be the PHP community. And the yellow folks, there's kind of orange in there and stuff. There's lots of other communities. Like, that's really cool. But this perfectly exactly diagrams how all of tech works. They're all their own little circles. And while there's lines drawn to and from them, there's not actually interacting. And that's the problem. I do a lot with meetup groups. I speak at a lot of conferences, as I mentioned. And I've learned a lot from that. It's about cross-pollination. It's about making sure that you interact with other groups. If you guys are into PHP, have you ever gone to a non-PHP meetup that wasn't DevOps, but another programming language? Not you, but yeah, did you learn anything when you were there?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they have different ideas. They're kind of approaching the same problems in different ways. You might see fun stuff. I'm from Buffalo, New York, as I may have mentioned. And we started with, I run the Ruby group, and we said, you know what, we've got like 2 speakers this night. PHP group meets on the same night, usually. Let's get together, let's do like a double meetup. We had a great meetup. They had a guy talk about Symfony, a guy talk about new testing protocols. We had another guy who just developed his own testing platform in Ruby. Another guy talked about how to build gems. Everybody learned stuff. Everyone walked away happy. And so we continue to do that with the Java group and the other groups. And it's so awesome when you see that. Like, I'm really happy that Steve asked me to come and speak here because I don't get to speak at a lot of PHP conferences because I'm not a PHP speaker, which I think is kind of bullshit. Like, I talk about tech. I talk about things that people are interested in, things developers want to know. It doesn't matter what I do when I actually write my code. That's not really what's important. What's important is that we're consistently learning things. So, these are some things that I've actually heard at meetups. I go to a lot of meetups, like I said. I build meetups. And these are things that I've actually said, and I want them to sink in because it comes from all over the place. From designers aren't developers, they shouldn't be at hardcore tech meetups. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I'm pretty good at making functional, they work applications. They work, and they're in Times New Roman. And they work with white backgrounds. but they work, and they look like absolute garbage. And then I give it to a designer, and they make it beautiful with code. Yes, CSS is code. They work very hard to make things fit in the right place and lined up. I can't do these things. I'm just not capable. To be honest, like, my wife picks out my clothing for me because, like, I usually go with monochromes because I'm not really good at matching colors. You know, that's why I wear jeans all the time. I bought a pair of orange shorts. Apparently I wasn't supposed to do that. I don't really know what the rules are. But this is my point. Like, how are you going to say designers aren't hard coders? Can you do their job? Can you define exactly what it is that they're doing, do it for them? If you can't, and they're writing code, then they're coders. And you should accept them as such. The next one was, this was one of my favorites. Sysadmins can live without developers. What do we need them for? This was said to me by someone I work with. We were working on a sport team together. And I was like, I'm a developer, dude. That's kind of a little bit offensive, but let's take a step back and just take what you said. So you're a sysadmin. You do what? You build servers? You build virtual servers. That's cool. What are you serving? Oh, applications built by developers. Okay, so kind of necessary, otherwise you don't have a job? Because no one just needs servers to be servers, to do servery stuff? I don't know what they do with that applications. This is one of the hardest ones. Business folks just don't get developers. In my recent job searches, this is not entirely accurate. One of the people that I'm lucky enough to work with is this lady, Jill Jubinski. She almost exclusively works with cloud companies. She likes the cloud, she's into it. She's not a very techy person, she's a technical recruiter. She's a business person. She wants to build teams that make sense. However, she gets people, and she understands how developers work. If she didn't, she would not be as successful as she is, and she's known for building some of the best teams that cloud companies have today. She does an amazing job, but she's a business person. She wants to only get people who are going to work well within the group and make the business money. So you can't say that she doesn't get developers. She totally does. Without her, I wouldn't be up here today. Then my favorite. Tech people are socially inept. All of them. This came at a meetup that wasn't about tech. And I was like, you do realize that I'm a developer. You're telling me that I'm socially inept. I'm running your meetup. I'm the MC. I come in and I greet all the people. I know more people in this room than you do, and you come here every month. You're going to tell me that developers are socially inept? I'm not going to say we're the most open people in the world, and not all of us are as gregarious as I am. You can switch gregarious with annoying if you prefer. I'm kind of obnoxious. But this is the thing. People have these ideas in their head of what tech should be or what tech shouldn't be, or what one part of tech is compared to another part of tech. And it's absolute crap. We're problem solvers. That's what we're here to do, solve problems, so we have to do that together. It would be really cool if we started doing that as a tech community. We got a PHP community, a Ruby community, a DevOps community. We all need to do these things together. All of these pieces interlink to finish the puzzle. The puzzle is what we're trying to get to. So, I mean, I see the word tech community thrown around a lot, especially by companies that are like, yes, we're a big part of the tech community. It's like, yes, you've got a lot of SEO going into that statement right there, don't you? Somebody in marketing really studied up on what this means. But in reality, we are part of the tech community. We just need to interact a little bit more. Stop being in all these glass houses and continually throwing our stones. Just get along for the kids. So let's talk about open source in the enterprise. So this is something that's come up for me fairly recently because I've worked for the past 5 years at companies that were built on open source, companies that were startups, and now I'm working for technically a subsidiary of IBM. IBM is in no way, well, it does open source stuff, but it's definitely enterprise. I have to use Lotus Notes for my email now. That's definitely enterprise. But the thing is, there's kind of a few things you can learn from the enterprise. Let's go back to this guy. So Shaggy, living in San Francisco, all West Coast, making useless crap apps. Or, he lives in his mom's basement, builds Linux packages, and, hopes he makes enough money somewhere along the line to feed the 40 cats that he owns. Because that's the perception of open source, right? That's the way we live. Open source software people, they never make any money. They never do anything valuable. Whereas the enterprise guy makes all the money. Because enterprise is all about business! Yes! All they want to do is sit in great cubes and kick out Excel spreadsheets and build software that makes more Excel spreadsheets. And Excel spreadsheets, that's a whole other level of programming that most of us don't understand. It's not true. These guys, they have a soul. Granted, they're a little more mechanical, or we're a little more creative. That's kind of where the crossover comes from. We can learn things from each other. There's things in enterprise that open source can learn, like organization, how to keep things proper, how to keep things running, put things on a timeline. And I'm not talking about agile or lean, because I don't give a shit about either of those things. But there's certain organizational points that the open source community could truly learn from enterprise. At the same time, the enterprise can learn more about creativity, which you'll see more in like front-end development, and how they actually solve problems instead of saying this is the way we do it, and this is the way it has to be done. So we can all kind of get along. We can all kind of interact and do things together, you know, if for no other reason for the children. So what was the point of this talk? I've got a few more slides here, but this is where I get to the point. The point is there's flaws in our logic. We're people. People make a lot of mistakes. People are often inundated, especially when they come into something new, with a pervasive rose-colored glasses kind of attitude. And you're told, you know, when you start doing it, this is the way. This is just the way it's done. This is just the attitude we've always had. This has just been our perspective for years. Just get in line and go with it. And I say to hell with that. Just because it's the way it's always done doesn't mean that's the way we should keep doing it. That's not the way to continually build and grow and solve problems, which is, again, what we do. We're developers. So maybe start to try to poke at these things. Start going, you know, to other meetups. Start going to other conferences. Try to submit talks to places where you would never speak, or you'd see an audience you'd never interact with before. If speaking's your thing, I know it's not for everybody. You know, start kind of breaking the pedestals. I think all developers are awesome. And I think that, you know, we do things that a lot of people can't do, or a lot of people aren't willing to do. And that's great, like it's really cool, but let's be realistic. If you were a ninja, I wouldn't be able to see you. If you were a rock star, you'd be on a stage much bigger than this, doing something much more awesome than this. And there's no wizards, probably. I think we did that this morning with the passing of Alan Rickman, that we're done with wizards now. But at the same time,
too soon.
Was it? Yeah, I didn't know if I should do it, but I did. But at the same time, like, we all have the opportunity to be amazing. We all have that potential. And we can always build on it. We accept more and more people into our community, the tech community. We stop being exclusive. We stop pushing people out. We help people to get involved. You know, I know there's a lot of talks that you'll see on the circuit or on Twitter and even on Facebook about, you know, inclusion and diversity and stuff like that. That's great, and we can all easily give lip service to that. Say, yes, I absolutely agree with that. But are you willing to reach out to, like, you know, a high school senior who really wants to get into code, but he can't because he comes from a poor black family in the middle of your city? Are you willing to do that? Because that's what's going to make it better. You have to take steps to make things better. You can't just hope for the best. So make people feel welcome, whether they're open source or enterprise, man, woman, old, young, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Get people moving in the right direction. So we need to kind of forget the legend, forget the myths about what you are and who you do. You're not a PHP developer. There's more to you as a person, there's more to you as a developer than just I code PHP or I code Ruby or whatever. You have to kind of do your best to be cool with everybody around you and make them feel welcome. Teach them and don't be, you know, disdainful, like, oh my God, you don't know that? Like, I'm sure there's things that I know that you guys don't know, and vice versa. We could teach each other, and that would make it a much better place. You know, help new people get into the game. It's a great way to not only learn what you know, which Yitz was talking about this morning, but also a great way to get more people to know what you know, and therefore they can pass it on and make it better. And then we can get rid of these urban legends. Thanks. Anybody has questions or comments? We've got time, so I'm really happy. If not, you can tweet at me and make fun of me. I don't know. I'm cool. I'm pretty resilient.
I heard that when Ruby came out, all the bad PHP programmers went to Ruby because that's what the money was. And then the good ones came back and started making those MVCs in PHP.
I cannot speak to the accuracy of that statement. I think that there was a large migration of PHP developers to Ruby. Not so much when Ruby came out, because Ruby came out in like '96. And it never really took off until like 2000s when
Rails
Rails came out.
blew up.
And yes, it did become like a total money pit where people were like, hey, we can totally make more money doing this. And then a lot of people did disseminate to other communities. And that's part of the new hotness. Like that was the new hotness of 10, 15 years ago. And now we have like the, oh my God, I'm gonna totally, screw Ruby, screw PHP, I'm doing Go now. I do Go. I'm going to all the Go conferences, I love Go. Yeah, it's like a cycle. It happens every once in a while. I remember, back in the day, I'm a little bit older, but back in the day when all of the cool Perl programmers left to go to PHP. Because they were like, hey, web stuff, this is so much better. We don't have to do all this ridiculous.
When 3 came out?
What's that?
When 3 came out?
Yeah. So yeah, it's cyclical, and I think it'll keep happening, but I think there's certain languages that will be more resilient. Like there's still a lot of companies using Ruby, there's tons of companies using PHP. Still a lot of companies using Perl. Shit, there's a lot of companies using AS400. Like these things that are resilient and mature, but continue to progress, won't go away. Whereas you will see things like those crazy JS languages, they'll fade. And I think like as developers, we owe it to ourselves to learn more of the more resilient languages, even if we're not going to permanently stay there, but to learn what we can take from them and incorporate that into what we're
So what have you noticed? Why do we do that? Maybe that's a question for Ed. But what is the mental state? Why do we like to chase the silver lure and the thing?
Well, part of it is the same reason why when the new iPhone or the new Android comes out, we want that. It's just kind of I want to stay on top of things. As developers, a lot of times, we want to stay on top of things. But staying on top doesn't mean absolute context switching every single time. It just means being aware. The great thing is open source, you don't have to buy anything, so it makes it really easy. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think it's a constant need to feel relevant and not feel like, I guess, 30, 40 years later, I'm still a COBOL programmer. Never really got out of that, but.
Does it play into the imposter syndrome?
Oh, it totally does.
We don't believe that we were justified in getting paid for what we did, and so we're going to learn something new.
Exactly.
I think it's the same. I'm sorry, I'm stepping all over your question.
Not even slightly. Go ahead.
It's the exact same reason why, like you said, iPhone, or like, I've been following, like I've been into consoles and PC gaming for a long time. Like I started doing fanzine when I was 14 for the Sega Genesis. And it's the same stuff. People get all uppity about that. I think they feel that their choice to do X is invalidated because somebody else is telling them that. And at the end of the day, I think it all traces back to tribalism and human beings as social animals, and that there's evolutionary advantages to being tribal. But it also means that there's stuff that in a society like ours, which is not nature, and we don't live in the society that we adapted to, or in the world we adapted to, that there's also stuff where there's this fear of not being part of a social group, and fear of being rejected from a social group, and also then just fear of other social groups that have different values than our own. And so it's our natural tendency, because of the way that our brains work, I'm kind of talking on my ass here, but just go with it, is to feel threatened by those differences and to attack things that threaten us and threaten our group. So, so that's why you have stuff where, why do people say, well, what's this Rails crap? Because some people started liking Rails. And enough people started liking Rails that people doing other stuff noticed. And so the natural tendency is that those values are different than the values I have. And I find that threatening because that calls into question the choices that I've made and the groups that I associate with. Even though it really shouldn't, because you should be confident enough in your own choices to say, that's fine, that's the choice you make, I'm making this choice.
No, but that's part of where the imposter syndrome comes in.
Exactly. So imposter syndrome is part of that. It's a symptom of that tendency that we all have. And you have to work hard to get past that. That's what people do. That's what
Yitz was talking about this morning.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why you have to you know, it's a real danger to have your hobby and your, you know, your relaxation be what you know, you can't define yourself by, you know, all that, but we do, because
That's,
Oh, we absolutely.
yes, and I think that we take it, I think as developers, we take those things far more personally because of that. Because most people who work a given job that is not this kind of work will not say to themselves, they'll say, this is what I do, not this is
Yeah.
what I am.
I am defined by being an accountant, like no one says
No
that.
one really says that. Like, yeah, no, I work as an accountant.
I'm really into the accounting
But
culture.
you don't run into a lot of people who say, no, I work as a programmer.
Right.
No, they say they are a programmer. I am
I
a
am a
developer.
programmer. I am a developer. Yeah.
And that self-identification has pluses and minuses to it. And one of those minuses is that when your choices are called into question, that threatens you on a very primal level of like, who am I? Am I an invalid person? Right? And that's messed up because this is all just a bunch of stupid code to make, you know, web pages fly at people and stuff like
Exactly.
that. So,
Well, and part of it I think too is the fact that like with things like Twitter and even IRC, like it's so easy for someone to latch on to one thing you said one time and completely base who you are as a person by that. Like, and there's never any context. Like I could be like, oh my god, you're a fucking PHP developer, and if I say it in monotone, oh my god, you're a fucking PHP developer, you have no idea what the hell I did. You'd be like, oh my god, you're a fucking PHP developer. That's so awesome. Like, but you read it on Twitter and you're like, hey, I think this guy doesn't like me. And then there's a flame war going on, and everybody's like, what's happening? Oh, Rails and PHP don't get along because two people said something one time. Like, you know, and we had it in Ruby for a while. There was a website, I don't know if it's still around, called Ruby Drama. Where it was like anytime, and there were two guys who would perpetuate this. Like they were best friends, and they thought it was just the funniest thing to do. So they would just like say something like, "Oh, did you see the new like Rails 3 protocol that came out? It's stupid. I don't know why." We're like, "Why would you say it's stupid?" And like Ruby Drama would be like, "You're not gonna believe what these two guys said to each other on Twitter today." It's like, yeah, because you were gonna pick that up like a bad Hollywood News magazine and be like, "Ruby, that place is so broken." But I mean, it's so easy to sit back from your seat and disagree with anybody anonymously on the internet, poke fun at what they do, and have no actual like context for that action and no repercussions. It's called being an internet hero, and it's totally messed up. But and I'm not going to say I've never done it before. Totally done it before. But it's not a good thing. It's not something you should be proud of. And that's kind of the whole point. Like that's what brings us to new things, and what often causes imposter syndrome. Like it's like a double-edged thing. Like you feel like an imposter because what you're doing is not the new hotness that everybody's talking about, and you feel like an imposter in the new community because you weren't there right at the beginning when everybody else was getting started. Like you can't win, and that's kind of the point. Like enjoy what you do, look into other things, definitely build on your skill set, look into other languages, see how they do things, and then make decisions based on that because you're going to be a person. And you know, sometimes you can't get to those meetings. You have family. That's part of you being a person. I'm not just a developer. I'm a dad. Like, you want to ask me what my job is? That's my job. I also have to develop code. I write code. It's part of what I do. On my tax return, when they put in the little box that says occupation, I write drummer. I make no money from that whatsoever. That's what I write. Because they let you write whatever you want. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
When you talk about inclusiveness both within different communities and groups and between communities and groups, I don't know if anybody's familiar with PHP internals and trying to maybe adopt a code of conduct. Sorry. For those who aren't, in the last week or so, someone proposed, "Hey, PHP internals, maybe we should have a code of conduct." And PHP internals like just freaked out everybody. I mean, just flame wars and yeah, a lot of just general butthurt for one reason or another. So what role do you think, or do you think there is a role for something like codes of conduct within these communities?
I think there's definitely a role for it. And I'll tell you why. This is, again, it's kind of a double-edged thing. For the people who organize these communities, I've organized a few conferences and stuff, it's a CYA. It's a way to cover your ass if something happens. Like if someone goes in and does something offensive that hurts somebody, you know, mentally or physically, causes some sort of damage, breaks things within your community, you should have an outline plan on how to handle these things, whether it's a slap on the wrist or, hey, you're not welcome here anymore. To say, yes, there's going to be repercussions. You can't just do whatever you want. You can't call people, racial epithets or demean women or anything like that. You can't do that. It's not going to fly. And if it does, we have a course of action. On the other side, which is sometimes the negative side, it also means you now have to let everybody in so they get one chance. That means anybody who may have a track record they've been a total fucking asshole for years. You have to say, hey, listen, just so you know, we've adopted a code of conduct now. This is your last chance. Follow these rules, and incidents will occur. Like, incidents are going to occur. It's going to happen. I've run 6 or 7 different conferences around the world, and not having a code of conduct generally hurts you a hell of a lot more than having one. Code of conduct makes people feel welcome. They feel like, okay, well, if something happens, I have a reporting body to send it to, and there's going to be something that occurs. And I know that there's orders of magnitude that are different from little things and big things. But at the same time, I feel welcome. Last year, I was at a conference that didn't have a code of conduct. I had a gentleman who was running the room that we were sponsoring. He was harassed. He was insulted. Many things were said to him that hurt him mentally. He was nearly in tears. He went to the head organizing body and he was like, we don't have a code of conduct. Fucking buck up, buttercup. This is fucking real life. That's literally what they said. This is fucking real life, bro. Deal with it. And he was like, I just got harassed, like illicitly harassed. And they're like, yeah, don't worry. So no repercussions. He's no longer a part of the organization. Many, many people are not going to that conference ever again. So they're losing people. And so I guess that's really what you have to think about with the code of conduct. Do you want to not have one and lose people? Or have one, and yes, there might be a little more work you have to do. And yes, there might be a little bit of political shuffle here and there. But nonetheless, you're going to end up with a better community in the end. And that's kind of the way I look at it. I'd rather be covered than not.
There are, of course, nuances to how it's presented to.
That's true.
And one thing that I think is important for everybody to remember is that being inclusive and diverse means being empathetic and respectful of people who disagree with you. Now, sometimes on both sides of it, a thing like a code of conduct or things like that, it's really easy for people to be very dismissive of other points of view. And that's a real problem. And so people who are kind of like, well, anybody who doesn't accept the code of conduct is probably a misogynist asshole or things like that. No. So more.
That's been my experience with every single person who's broken a code of conduct who've had to throw out of a conference.
Yeah.
They're assholes. I don't feel bad at all.
Right. But there's some people who have philosophical arguments about what about this and what about that? How do you handle privacy things? And do you have privacy for the person who's being accused too? How does the person being accused respond to that? There's a person I know who's a woman who was accused in some kind of code of conduct. She couldn't even find out what she said that offended this person. And it's kind of
right.
So obviously the devil's in the details a little bit
yeah.
with that.
There's definitely degrees in what goes on.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, it's not just a matter of you take the code of conduct from the geek feminism wiki and slap it into what you're doing and say, yep, let's call it a day, we're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to understand what you're doing and understand there has to be ways to shift that and make it work. You can't, I, for example, I'm a fairly open-minded person, but I know lots of people who are very closed-minded and feel free to share their beliefs. And to be honest, if it has nothing to do with code, and it's just you sharing that you think Trump is the best, good, that's your thing, fine, go ahead, run with it. Have a good time. It's not me. I'm not going to shoot you down for it unless you harass me on Facebook. But that has nothing to do with the code that I'm writing. Nothing to do with the community I'm contributing to. People are going to be people. You got to let them be people. They just don't get to be assholes.
Right.